Thank you so much to Alexandra and the team for having us here and being able to start our day. Well, maybe some of you have already been doing many things, but start our day in this moment of contemplation. And I think, quite fitting at this moment in time for much of Asia that we think about how artists, art, and culture can help heal us. And, we have this idea of ceremony here at Asia Now to celebrate the 10th anniversary. And so incredibly appropriate that we talk to the incredible team at the Diriyah Biennale Foundation and the Islamic Arts Biennale, which will be opening in January in Jeddah. So much of what is happening across the region makes us pause, and actually moments of deep grief, which I have approached and seen this week. But somebody has described what's happening in Saudi Arabia as an oasis of that. And I think it's so incredibly important that we have at the heart of it, of course, artists. So Muhannad here in his dual role as an artist who has shown at the previous biennales, and of course the contemporary curator here, Arwa, who is a core team member at the Diriyah Biennale Foundation, and Dr. Amin Jaffer, who is one of the artistic directors of this second edition. And following us, actually, we have Sumaya Valley, who was the first artistic director, at the first Islamic Arts Biennale. So it's quite a family moment, because I always believe that at the heart of everything we do, we must speak to the artists. So I'm going to put Muhannad on the spot in, as I said, your dual capacity as, of course, artist and curator in this role. We are here in France, in a place that has a complicated relationship with religion, with secularism, and as we know, that's a very different concept to what we see in the Middle East. So we have on purpose titled this talk about spirituality and civilization. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about where you're coming from as both an artist and a curator in that?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here to speak with my colleagues and with the DBF team and family. When I was asked by Sumaya to participate in the first edition as an artist, I had my doubts. What was Islamic art, and specifically what was contemporary art that was Islamic? How could I contribute? How does my work fit in such a space? And you spoke about change that is going in, where we speak about the word change in Saudi Arabia a lot, but what does that really mean? I think nowhere is the idea of change really embodied and manifested in such a real, tangible way than in the Islamic Arts Biennale. Because to bring together notions of the past, historical objects, the ideas of faith and Islam, in dialogue, in communication, in proximity to contemporary thought and thinking, it's the role of the artist to think in imaginative ways, to question, to think laterally, and to allow that to happen in a moment of change, in proximity to something that we maybe in the past thought of as being rigid, something we could not negotiate with, we could not compromise with, is a true testimony to the change that we're experiencing in the country. And for that reason, I participated as an artist, and I then accepted this role to curate, because I think the work is not over. It is a long dialogue that we are experiencing, and I'm invested in seeing this take shape into something fluid.
And Arwa, I think, kind of besides, of course, your official capacity, I think as a Saudi woman, and kind of representing that space, which I know is complicated and tough, but people are just like, tell me what it's like to be in Saudi Arabia right now. How do you see that being reflected in your work, working within these teams and the artists and curators reflecting that upon the Biennale? I mean, we of course also have the Diriyah Contemporary Arts Biennale. and Contemporary Art Biennale and the Islamic Arts Biennale, which is also a whole other topic for another panel.
No, I think it's interesting, and just building on what Muhannad said, the platform of the Islamic Arts Biennale is so important that these conversations are happening also in such close proximity to the place of origin. And the fact that the Diriyah Biennale Foundation, it also runs an entirely different biennale in alternating years, Contemporary Biennale in Riyadh, which is about, just for relativity, it's about 2 hours by plane away from Jeddah. It's the same team that runs a Contemporary Art Biennale as a team that runs a Contemporary Islamic Arts Biennale, of course, inviting incredible curators and partners from outside to contribute. But this team is also run predominantly by women, and much is the cultural landscape in
young,
Saudi Arabia.
Very young
and young women. I think I might be the oldest person on the team, and it is a young, incredibly positive, optimistic team. But what's more interesting is the work that's being done on both biennials and the positioning and the experience in actually working with the curators, the production houses, the communities everywhere. You're seeing the engagement of people in Saudi Arabia. I mean, predominantly this endeavor is a cultural endeavor also for the country and for the people. And you've seen engagement across both cities with, over, in the Islamic Biennale, over 600,000 people in our very first edition, and doubling to 200,000 people in our Contemporary Biennale. So it's definitely, as Muhannad said, it's something that we're here to witness and to keep driving. And as women, it's not even a topic anymore, because it's who's leading it is obviously a lot of the women. There's no conversation anymore of, can a woman lead this?
I often use an expletive when people ask me about the role of women in Saudi Arabia right now. And I'm like, experience, see, and just move on from that topic.
Yeah, exactly.
And Amin, you've spent your entire career kind of course, as someone deeply personally, ethnically, spiritually, a part of this world, but now kind of reflecting on objects of history. So I think what Muhannad said at the beginning, how do you marry this, and how do you witness the change as somebody both as an outsider and an insider?
Thank you, Alia. It's a very pertinent question. As you've said, throughout my academic career, I've been fascinated by encounters, and what the Biennale does is it allows us a chance to juxtapose historic works of art from across Muslim civilizations, whether they be sacred or secular objects.
Sorry, can I interrupt you? And I think that's a really important point. So can we kind of just maybe expand on that a little bit in terms of, what we call Islamic arts? Or
Yes, absolutely. I think, first of all, I should explain that something a little bit about the Biennale, because we haven't talked really about the theme or what the composition of the Biennale is. First of all, I'd like to say that it takes place in a magnificent site,
which you're witnessing on the screen behind you,
which is the Western Hajj Terminal Complex of the King Abdulaziz Airport, built in the 1970s to receive the millions of pilgrims who come to Jeddah on pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina. So it's a site that's already imbued with not just a historicity, but also with a great sacred atmosphere. This site has been given over to the Biennale, and the idea behind the Biennale, conceived in the first edition, in which Alia was very involved, is to juxtapose historic objects with contemporary art. And of course, we address different themes. This year, the theme is, and all that is in between. This is a term that appears more than 30 times in the Quran, and it refers to Allah the Creator, God the Creator, having made everything, the heavens, the earth, and all that is in between.
Can I ask Arwa Muhannad just perhaps say the phrase in Arabic?
Yes.
The phrase or the verse is وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا, which means all that is in between. And it's interested in this idea of not the edges of things, not the binary of things. It is more about this liminal, expansive, layered space of the in-between that matters, that we are exploring in this Biennale.
And just if I can say also on that, is the creation of also these themes and components of the biennales are in Arabic, which is a critical point as well. And, you know, though people are invited from all over the world to join the conversation and help create the framework of the conversation, these concepts are developed in the language of origin. So that really changes the conversation and allows it to come from a different place as well.
So the Biennale addresses various themes. We open with 2 galleries that explore the sacred or the heart, called Al-Bidayah, the beginning, in which we show relic objects from the sacred sites of Mecca and Medina in dialogue with contemporary art. We then move to the second form of expression, the mind, thinking, in a section called Al-Madar, and this is a very important component of the Biennale. It's a curated exhibition on a theme that's universal to mankind, which is numbers. We all use Arabic numbers. So here we look at works of art from across more than 30 global institutions that are participating in the Biennale, really as curators who have worked with our team to develop the concept and to develop the display. But here we approach the intellectual through works of art, whether they're astrolabes or maps, objects that show symmetry or show any form of science that needs numbers. And then we move to the final section, Al-Muqtani, homage, where we look at the contribution of 2 individual collectors. Here we look at the hand. So what we do is we express the sacred through the heart, the mind, and the hand, feeling, thinking, and making. We then come to the outdoor spaces of the Biennale, which are very much under the direction of Muhannad, where we address the classical Islamic garden, but through the eyes of contemporary artists who address themes that relate to the environment, botany, knowledge, wonder, congregation, contemplation, within the context of the traditional Islamic garden.
And how would do you answer a question that's related to what is the difference in the context of having your conversations with artists, I think in particular now, because of course we're here at a contemporary art fair and of this week of Art Basel in Paris, the difference between spirituality and religion.
I mean, of course, spirituality is an integral part of any person's personal journey through this idea of life, whether we come to a personal relationship or a structure that is more a religious system. My conversations with artists, of course, there is capacity also to reject the idea of spirituality or to, adopt something that is unique to one's own perspective. The conversations I'm having with artists are not mandated by being spiritual or religious. It is more a, Jeddah, where this Biennale is happening, is historically a port city and remains. So we want to welcome back to Jeddah for this Biennale new congregations of ideas, new ways of seeing, new ways of imagining, new narratives that can help soften the edge between the harshness of the binary, of the yes and no, the right and wrong. We want to dwell more in the gradient, softer space.
The in-between.
The in-between.
And Amin, I think on the idea of relic and object, and also something that was used as opposed to worshipped, what are those questions? I think, as we just said, the difference between art and arts within the context of Islamic art history.
Well, what I think is very relevant, indeed, there are some objects in the Biennale, particularly in the first 2 galleries, that one would call sacred objects. They're objects that are part of the ritual, to return to the theme of Asia now, the ritual of the practice of Islam. But there are many objects in the Biennale, particularly in the Al-Madar and Al-Muqtani sections, which are purely secular objects made for a variety of functions, a variety of use. But what I think we have to remember is that one thing that is so important of the Biennale is that we show the past with the present. and we explain the continuum of human civilization rather than simply looking at the contemporary. We aim to really show audiences what our past has been and the continuity of humanity, human devotion, human expression, and human emotion. And why I mention this is that it's only very recently that we have identities as secular people. People until very recently have identified themselves almost principally according to their faith. Living in the Western secular world as contemporary people, it's something that's lost on us. But until relatively recently, the idea of your religion or your community or your system of belief has been important. In this Biennale, what we show, why we call it Islamic arts, is we try and explain that Muslims exist and have contributed towards Islamic civilization, whether they're from Mali or from Indonesia, from Central Asia, China, or indeed Europe. And so there are works of art, secular and sacred, which come from a variety of different people who have practiced Islam. I think this is a very important component. The other component that I think is very relevant is that for people who are interested in Islamic civilization, until now, one had to learn about it from Western sources in Western museums, the Louvre, the Met, the V&A. This is really the opportunity of Muslims, people to whom these objects relate, to express their history and their culture.
Well, I think actually, so one of the early. So sorry, we have a question. I think.
No.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I think Arwa. The early days of discovering these objects, actually, kind of pre even the first Biennale. Even for many of the Saudis on the team, they hadn't been to these places. They hadn't been in these storerooms. They hadn't seen these things. So, of course, even for the wider community, this is incredible. But even for the locals, like what does this?
So just for context, the Western Hajj Terminal, which has such cultural significance and kind of really touches the hearts and minds of Muslims across the world, is the gateway to Mecca and Medina for pilgrims across the world. But Saudis have never really been there. They didn't need to.
You see it. So anyone who hasn't been there, I mean, you don't miss it. You see it every time you
It's
drive.
a dramatic sight under canopies and
visible from the highway.
Visible from the highway, from an airplane. And it has such significance for a couple of reasons. One, because it is the gateway. Two, Saudis have never really experienced it or been. Three, it also was awarded the Aga Khan Award in 1982, which puts really a map on this area. And it's for Saudis coming through to where the world has experienced Saudi in historic and kind of spiritual terms has been really, really, significant. And I can also just say in that, and the objects, well, in that context as well, we have, incredible objects, and the search for these objects in our first edition was also an emotional search. One being, we had ancient objects that were in Mecca that I think some of them were the oldest dated works of Islam that were finally showcased to the public, but not just showcased, also put up for restoration, also discussed. And that trust building between...
Actually, perfect example, right?
Exactly. So the gate of, and so two things. One was the column. One was an old column that was in Mecca, in the square of Mecca, that was brought on. And the feat of bringing these objects from their original place of origin, restoring them, kind of developing the trust. And by the way, that trust was developed by two of our female members of the team that they would only deal with to discuss and negotiate the delivery of these objects. And not only that, but also the contemporary response to these objects. So having ancient objects in tandem and in dance with some of the contemporary objects.
So you see the door, we can describe, yes.
So this is the King Abdulaziz door, and it's a door that people have spoken about, talked about, but never been able to see up close. And so it has a lot of cultural and historic significance to Muslims across the world, but to Saudis in particular that have never been able to experience it are also coming in intimate proximity to it. And one other thing, just for this site, the invitation to artists who are Muslim, non-Muslim also coming in to have a conversation about the experience of being a Muslim has also a significance because you really have to come to see it and to believe it. And I think Muhannad's done an incredible job right now is having that conversation with new, some emerging, very established artists in response to this incredible theme. And just one more thing, if I could add, and Dr. Amin spoke about the different components of the Biennale. The Al-Madar section, which is the institutional section of the biennial, initially we invited 12 institutions to come, and not just, we're not assuming that we have all the responses of an experience of Islam, but it's inviting everyone else that has their own experience, their own collections, their own story and journeys with Islamic art to come and tell it on the platform of the biennial. We had 12 institutions the first edition, and now we have 34 institutions in conversation with each other, from Western institutions to institutions in Uzbekistan, to the Louvre. And so it's quite an incredible thing that these institutions will be in conversation in an Al-Madar section, which is called the Orbit, that will live on. It's a legacy that will live on for many years.
I think on that subject, so having had those early conversations for the first Biennale, many institutions, have these objects, but had never even been to Saudi or had never, kind of the place of spiritual origin. So, I mean, maybe tell us, having worked in the field for so long and now seen this opening up, I mean, could you ever have imagined being able to do this?
It's a remarkable project because it's a path-breaking project. I think first, juxtaposing the old and the new. Secondly, my colleagues from Saudi actually negotiating with the holy mosques to show works in an exhibition context, I think would have been unthinkable. But what I think is really remarkable is I think people even interested in Islamic art had no idea that there were within Saudi Arabia such treasures, number one. The other thing which...
Sorry, just to give context to that, is that many of the objects, and we hear often of horrors of monuments being destroyed, objects being destroyed, but the unique factor in Saudi Arabia was that actually many objects, Al-Ala exists in its entirety. Objects in the holy mosques in Mecca and Medina exist, and they were in storerooms. They weren't, there wasn't this idea of kind of iconoclasm in that way.
Indeed, just as churches have often treasuries and library connections, mosques have the same. So this is an opportunity to show to a wide public, regardless of denomination, works of art from within these collections in Saudi Arabia. And as Arwa has explained, often in dialogue with objects that come from institutions around the world, in which the curators are participating. So it's a truly collaborative platform. We would have never imagined it possible, but why it is so important. For those who don't know Islam, or who are new to Islam, it's an opportunity to really understand the faith and the great works of art that have been generated in the faith. And I think this is very important. For Muslims themselves, although they may know the Quran, it doesn't mean that they've seen the most outstanding 9th century indigo and gold painted Quran from North Africa. So it's an opportunity for Muslims, and the visitor figures are remarkable because many pilgrims who come to Mecca and Medina come to the Biennale, and many Saudi nationals come. People of Jeddah often come over and over and over. And it's a chance for everyone to come and understand high points of civilization.
To say also in the context of being here, it's free and open to the public. So that is like a kind of very core part of that.
And one thing is when they do come for example, to see a Quran.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I think, can we just talk about what we're seeing here? Exactly what you just said about pilgrims coming. So we see them in the traditional white robes. Can we explain that? I know some of you in the audience know this, but many of you don't. So
when you perform pilgrimage, when you perform Umrah, which is the minor pilgrimage, or Hajj, it's effectively a ritual in which you cleanse yourself and are cleansed of your sins. And the idea is that when you go on pilgrimage, there's a perimeter outside Mecca. And when you cross that perimeter, you must be in pilgrim's clothes, which are unstitched. And the idea is you're reborn just as a baby is wound, in just a simple piece of cloth. So what you see here is pilgrims who will have arrived at the airport, who will come to see the Biennale, and then they will go through for their pilgrimage. And what's remarkable is I think that they will be so inspired and so empowered by the experience of seeing Qurans through history that are exceptional for their quality, of seeing works of art from across Muslim civilizations that stand out. I'd like to mention one thing because you raised it in the beginning, and that's dialogue. There are many works of art, particularly in the Al-Madar section, which show dialogue between, let's say, the Islamic world and its neighbors. This can be in the realm of science, where we will have ancient Greek manuscripts which are scientific, that are then translated to Arabic after the fall of the classical world, that are then translated and published in early modern Europe. We will show Islamic textiles that are transformed into Western liturgical textiles. So throughout there is this dialogue in technology and in knowledge between the Islamic world and its neighbors. And that's also a very important component to understand how much exchange and reciprocity there was, not just in knowledge, but also in systems of belief.
And on that, I would recommend for anybody here to go and see the Silk Roads show at the British Museum, which is quite extraordinary in exactly that conversation. So about the Silk Roads, as we know, which kind of crosses Asia, and particularly objects of great historic significance from Uzbekistan and elsewhere. Muhannad, I think on that, how do you provide access to the contemporary artists to see and understand these historical objects to then know what they think they're going to do in the canopies? Or
it's not as hard or as complicated as we would think, because of course the idea of spirituality, faith, or Islam is a lived concept. A lot of these artists have gone through their process or are going through their process of reckoning or understanding or processing what it means to be spiritual. In Al-Madar, for example, to build on what Dr. Amin said, the artists that are participating with new commissions in that space, their practice also comes from ideas of the art of numbers, geometry, repetition, the power of numbers, and how we orient and measure, as well as calligraphy. One of the artists is Charwe Tsai, who's also showing here at Asia Now. She's going to be doing a new commission in Al-Madar. So these practices are natural to many of these artists, but they are taking them into new contemporary spaces. They are breaking the mold, and they are reinterpreting these historical ideas in contemporary fashion.
in terms of the conversations, perhaps an artist, what would be your greatest vision to see, like, of a contemporary artist in dialogue with some of the objects you've been working with over these many years?
Well, I would say that for me, the thrill is really when an artist responds to a historic concept or work of art and produces something which we know will speak to a young audience. And a lot of what we're doing, I think, any museum exhibition, any Biennale, is education and inspiration. And what we really hope with this Biennale in particular is for younger audiences to perhaps look first at a contemporary work of art because they can understand and relate to it. It's of their generation. And then to realize that it's actually grounded in something that's very, very fundamental and very old.
And the difference, I think, really with the Islamic Arts Biennale and also with the Diriyah Contemporary Art Biennale is these ideas of experiences, right? We talk a lot about experiential art. We have Team Lab in Jeddah, Kusama, Infinity Rooms. But when you have this Biennale and you see it in the canopies and Diriyah and the contemporary arts and Jack's, there are meals and there are moments of ceremony, celebration, contemplation. How does one kind of navigate that? Perhaps Arwa or Muhannad can.
Yeah, I think yesterday, actually, being here in Paris, I spoke to a couple of people that had been to Diriyah and that had been to the Islamic. And I think one thing they were surprised by was the amount of young people at the Biennale. So it's become a place of also just convening for families. Just school-wise, we've had over 16,000 students, I think over 400 schools visit, which is significant. I mean, you have in the contemporary Biennale, you have some of the most conservative traditional schools. I mean, the oldest, most traditional Quranic school in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, were one of our first invitations to come visit. I mean, it's a very emotional moment when you see these kids interacting not just with the arts, but in over 3 months, and in the case of the first edition of the Islamic, we were asked to extend it another month because of popular demand. So in the over 4 months, you have daily activation of educational program, and so it is an emotional engagement with the public, not because they haven't been there or seen it before, because this is kind of a new, we don't have Biennale. So it's an opportunity to reshape what a wholesome audience experience looks like. And that's really exciting.
Mm. The idea of kind of walking through and being welcomed to an institution is, of course, a science, right? We understand scenography, we understand an entrance point. And I think, we look at MoMA or the Met has these stairs where you walk up to, and then MoMA was built on the street, like at street level. And so these ideas, how do you welcome an audience? I mean, when you're now thinking about curatorially, how are you looking at the texts? How are you thinking? Because you're also speaking even here to two audiences, right? We have many Saudis, many Muslims in this room, but we also have many people who are perhaps unfamiliar with the practice.
It's a really great question. Of course, in terms of language, everything is in Arabic and in English.
And many other languages translated.
Translated, yes, through audio guides, etc. But the point is that in terms of labels and sign, but we're working, and I think it really deserves a mention, with a team called OMA. It's the architectural practice of Rem Koolhaas, who have really breathed life into our ideas. And we can't show them to you here. You'll have to come to Jeddah to experience them. But they have created, I would say, ethereal, visionary spaces in which the works of art will be displayed. The idea is for people to have a truly immersive exposure, and that once you enter the Biennale site, you almost feel in another universe, inspired, uplifted. The interiors, the scenography, the lighting, all of the elements of how you move through the space. I've already explained a bit the trajectory from the heart to the mind to the hand, which I think will be very perceptible. And then to the outdoor spaces where we enter the garden. So the Biennale project and its offering is calculated to appeal to people of all interests, of all backgrounds, of all ages. It's going to be a very, very complete offering, and it's designed very much with that concept of learning, but also with inspiration, I would say.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, to expand on that, for example, the outdoor garden Dr. Amin was mentioning, it's a garden of concepts where we bridge the gap between this in-between of the heavenly and the earthly. We're very much rooted in issues of our time. Before we can speak or think of notions of heaven, we need to first cultivate, repair, restore, deal with issues of our time, of the earth. The artists in the outdoor space are responding to the site, to the earth, social issues, environmental issues. The audience becomes the flow of water through this conceptual garden. There are 4 spaces or 4 quadrants that we've developed together, and here the audience journey defines these 4 quadrants, these 4 traditional quadrants of an Islamic garden, from personal moments through pathways and gateways to moments of understanding, then rejuvenation, ending with collective, communal installations where we come together and we kind of collectively reimagine ideas of the singular.
I mean, I think that's so poignant, and I'd love to open up to questions, please, from the audience. We have time for a few questions. And having just read an article this morning, I don't know why I do this to myself, a very depressing article about the water table of the earth is in imbalance for the first time ever, But perhaps, initiatives like the Islamic Arts Biennale, not so much about particularly being a Muslim or the religion of Islam, but about humanity's connection to each other. I think that we have all seen that that is somehow lacking amongst many of our fellow citizens. So perhaps when we are in balance with the earth, with water, the heavenly and the earthly, that is when we can make the world a better place. So do we have any questions in the audience? Please, someone. I know that they're burning questions because I get asked after these talks many times. So you feel free.
Well, it's not a question. I just want to break the ice so people can make some more questions. But I just want to say that I had the opportunity to, well, first of all, thank you for sharing so brilliantly what is the Islamic Arts Biennale. I'm French. I live here. I'm not a Saudi, but I had the chance to experience the Islamic Arts Biennale, and I have to say that my first experience was really surprising because I come from a Muslim family, but I'm not a Muslim myself. I grew up here, and I really got to understand many things cultural beyond the religion. And I have to say that the Islamic Arts Biennale, and it's really, I hope to share what was my experience, and people will want to go also. I think it's really giving a voice and enlightening a lot of people across the globe. And this is something that much people like me needed. So thank you for that. And I'm sorry, it's not a question, but just a thank you.
Questions? No. On that note, so perhaps, I think one thing to ask, my last question to our panelists is, what are you most excited about, as purely as an object, or as one collaboration or one thing that you have discovered or able to bring out and see?
I'm going to get this out of the way. No, for me, it's been every conversation with every artist. And I think it's something intangible that I'm excited about. The softening of the relationship between the ideas of civilization and spirituality, and kind of a softening of that space of the in-between.
Thank you so much. Did you have a...
No, I want to invite everyone first on it starts the Biennale.
Yes, we should do the practicalities.
Yeah.
So
Just on the 25th of January, we open. So we'd love to have everyone come. It does go on until May 25th, so it'll be 4 months, including institutions. We have a lot of partners as well. Some of them are here with us, Lexus, and partners that have also helped kind of spread the word. And so we'd love to invite everyone. It's coming to the Biennale is not just coming into the Western Hajj Terminal and experiencing that. It's also visiting Al-Ula. It's visiting the Red Sea. It's visiting Riyadh. You have an entire country that's open to new experiences. So I would invite you guys to come.
I mean, and to our local Parisian, because it's so important that we have Amin here. So I think Amin definitely wants all of his community and his friends and people to be there. So
I think the great thing is just the opportunity to exchange and to understand. I'm an object person. I write about objects. But when you spoke about the one thing, I would say that it's when we had a workshop in February in Riyadh, and we had representatives, curators, museum directors from many of the different institutions who are collaborating. And among those, it's out now in the news, is the Vatican.
Yeah, that's great.
And there was somebody from the Vatican who arrived in classical ecclesiastical attire. And it was really wonderful to see how he interacted with representatives of other institutions, which were, let's say, Islamic institutions, and the friendships that we formed and the exchanges that we made. I have to say, not just human ones, but also through works of art, because you see how fluid, to use the term, our borders when it comes to textiles and ceramics and science and knowledge and music and literature, and how much we all share, how we all share civilization.
thank you. Thank you for being here.